Hey, it's Soul with another video, and I'm gonna let you in on something. What if I were to tell you that I have a fantastic idea for the Raid Finder, aka LFR, for the World of Warcraft? What if I said that I can replace it with something better? Would that excite you? What if I said that instead of teaming up with 20 or so randos, you can be fighting alongside a team of 9 AI-controlled NPCs? Wait, no, don't go away yet. Okay, maybe that kind of grossed you out a little bit, but sit tight for just a couple minutes. Today I want to talk about, or I want to explore the idea of using AI in the World of Warcraft, because it's already here. We've seen it in island expeditions, which I know you guys love so much, and we've been seeing it in the recent new Arathi Basin Comp Stomp battleground. And as recently as this month, we've been seeing AI doing work in another high-profile MMORPG, you might have heard of it, Final Fantasy XIV. In Shadowbringers, which is its latest expansion, you can dive into its new dungeons with a traditional group of humans, or you can work with AI-controlled NPCs that you've met throughout your adventures. From the sounds of it, it's been pretty well received. Now, think of how computer-controlled party members could work in a WoW's dungeons. I'm not talking about taking them into high keystones or any Mythic Plus content, but I'm just talking about regular dungeons while you're leveling, or maybe a heroic dungeon if you remember that's a thing too. Imagine that feeling of being forced to run group content when all you want to do is get some crafting materials or finish a quest line. Maybe you just don't like people, but you love Warcraft. There's the possibility that you can run it with NPCs at your pleasure. For those of you who undoubtedly look down on something like this, I get it. Like, you might be thinking, oh, dude, why play an MMO at all if all you want is a single player experience, right? I'm not gonna provide answers to that argument, but the fact of the matter is that this argument exists. I think technology like this has huge potential. Like, imagine if you want to run a heroic on a freshly leveled character that you're not really completely comfortable with, or it's a new dungeon. You can always choose to run with people, like if you can deal with a DPS queue, hey, fine by me. Or maybe you can have the options of running with an AI team with no queue at all. Go ahead and get your feet wet in this brand new dungeon. I mean, in these kinds of runs, there's no go mentality, there's no need to rush. If you want to AFK, yeah, go ahead. If you made a mistake, oh, crap. Well, at least the only person that knows is you. Do you play at non-peak hours or just a really weird hour of the day? Cool. Machines don't sleep. The goal here, of course, is not to replace dungeon runs with AI, but to just complement an audience that needs an answer. It's to address very specific issues for those who want to explore a dungeon when it's current, but don't want to deal with the social pressures of being with strangers. Like I said, you could still queue up with people through random matchmaking or the pre-made group tool as you always have. And of course, you could just walk into the dungeon with friends. I'm sure there are drawbacks, including reducing the total pool of players or otherwise maybe increasing dungeon queues. But considering the target audience, I have to wonder out loud if there's anything really lost here, or is this just a system, is this just a way to deal with separating players who are incompatible with each other? And I have no doubt that there are engineering challenges to programming an AI that can handle dungeons and obey boss mechanics, let alone raids and those boss mechanics, which I'm going to get into. Shucks, and then there's the nuances of each depending on your class and your spec and your role. Whether it's hard to engineer or not, that has nothing to do with the conversation. We shouldn't just shut up because we think it might be too hard for Blizzard to do. So for now, let's continue to explore the possibilities with AI and go beyond dungeons and get into some sacred territory, raid content. This is just my opinion, but I feel like the easiest level of raid content, the Raid Finder or LFR, it's always been in a somewhat odd place. The argument that Raid Finder isn't considered real raiding, dude, that goes all the way back to the beginning of the system, way back in Cataclysm. There are those who say it's too forgiving, that it doesn't teach you what real raiding is, that it's a cheap way to experience what should be the pinnacle of PvE content. Those are all personal opinions, but they're all true in the hearts and minds of those who say it. So what would AI do to ruin/change the Raid Finder feature. At the very least, it wouldn't improve those perceptions some critics have that matchmaking content is considered single player, but I think that using AI could be a lot cooler than we would first realize. After sitting on the idea for a few days, I've kind of convinced myself that completely overhauling the Raid Finder feature using AI could create a complete and immersive experience, something that doesn't quite well define what LFR is. I'm really excited to talk about this, but really this is only a thought experiment and not a prediction of what's to come. It's just a big what if scenario that I'm sharing with you for fun. So as you're typing away with your comment, just calm down, okay? So let's start fantasizing, and we'll start off with rebranding. We're gonna come up with a new name for this raid difficulty that will replace the Raid Finder. I decided to call it Story Difficulty. Story difficulty is meant to be a more immersive experience, so in order to start it, you've got to go to the raid that you want to run, like walk there. And when you're out there, you can simply find an NPC who's standing out there. That person happens to be the quote raid leader of that raid. Like, hey buddy, let's start some shenanigans and have an adventure. And off you go into this AI raid, which will play out kind of similarly to a scenario. But like LFR, it's going to be separated by wings and released on a timed schedule. Let's use the present as context. This should be easy to understand. Imagine walking into the Eternal Palace and you're accompanied by the likes of Jaina, Lorthamar, Greymane, Thalyssra, Chandris, and maybe some lesser known or generic NPCs who will fill out the rest of the raid. The Eternal Palace in story difficulty mode is the story of this temporary partnership between the Horde and Alliance as they unite against their common foe. And at the helm is you, the champion of the Horde or the Alliance, who used the Javelin of Suramar to get everyone up to this point. Between you and these NPCs, this makes a party of 10, which kind of makes sense to me. And these NPCs, they're not the do-nothings that you're used to, who just kind of stand around swinging their nerf swords and throwing water balloons at the bosses, doing effectively nothing. This is your party. They're in your raid frames. You run alongside them, you heal, you fight with them from pull to pull, all the while you're listening maybe to some banter between these NPCs. Maybe they're talking about the instance, or talking to each other, they're talking about why they're there, they're maybe revealing some interesting story bits that we can speculate on later. The point is that this new ambience will immerse you, it'll pull you into the experience, but you can't just idle around and AFK, you're gonna have to work too. If you don't hold aggro as a tank, then your DPS or your healers are gonna die. If you're not healing, then your tank and other people are going to die. If you don't do enough damage, if you don't obey mechanics, you die. So when you get to a boss, this scenario sequence pauses. From there, you can talk to the raid leader and you can begin the encounter. Or you can maybe select some option where the NPCs will help explain just what's going on in the fight, and they'll explain what your role is based on how you queued up. When the battle begins, it feels just like normal. It's just that there are NPCs that are communicating with you. So maybe you'll get some alerts to spread out, to ball in, to drop your debuff a good distance away, avoid the opposite color, that sort of thing. If you screw something up, hopefully the NPCs will call you out, maybe laugh at you. If you die, maybe you'll get a battle res, maybe just one, but most definitely, whoever it was that battle res you will probably give you a hard time over it. The combat in story difficulty, I have to admit, it's probably not going to offer too much flexibility. You just commit to whatever role that you chose. I imagine that for the most part, story difficulty will be designed in a way that you just need to obey the basic mechanics from the dungeon journal and listen to your NPCs whenever they're talking to you, and you'll eventually be victorious. But since you're the only player in the scenario, it's still going to be driven by you. You can't just AFK through this either. In a way, story difficulty, because story difficulty is focused on you, this might be just a slight uptick in difficulty from what would otherwise be a competent raid finder group. So eventually the boss dies, maybe you get something, maybe you don't, and you move on until you're done with that particular wing, and that's it. There's a valid question to ask here. Why the hell are we doing this? The idea is that with story difficulty replacing the raid finder, we're abandoning this entire pretense of trying to emulate the feeling of an organized raid. Instead, this experience and immersion is going to come from the interactions with your fellow teammates. As one person in a group of 20 random people who are only going to stay together for about half an hour, knowing that we may never ever see each other again, I find it pretty impossible to capture a similar experience where I would team up with people and build friendships and all that stuff. As for things like mechanics and tuning in Raid Finder, from my observations, it looks like players feel like they're either not contributing enough or they're over contributing, because inside the Raid Finder there is a huge difference between skill and gear and knowledge. Going back to story difficulty and AI, whether it's applied to a dungeon or a raid, the whole point is to try and give context from the perspective of the NPCs that are participating in it to help forward the story. The connection that you have is not with fellow players, but it is with the NPCs that you have been questing with. If people want to call it out as a single player experience, hey, go ahead, because it is. Story difficulty is trying to deliver a better overall experience than the one that we have today, but of course, I have to consider the rewards that you're going to get from this too. Considering that the Raid Finder features other players, and these other players might trade you gear that they get under certain conditions, story difficulty ought to offset that disadvantage of being alone by guaranteeing a piece at the end of the wing, or after the last boss is killed in that wing. And this is on top of getting a chance to get gear from every boss kill. Maybe it'll be some random gift from the loot table, or maybe you can choose one item from a predetermined allotment of rewards. I don't know. The way that I see it, at least, the original goal of the Raid Finder difficulty was to encourage more participation in the highest level PvE content that's available. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been put into it, but it's offered in a way that doesn't have these very stringent skill, gear, or social requirements. But this year, it's going to be 8 years since the introduction of the Raid Finder. We've had the Raid Finder longer than we haven't had it. Today we have AI, we have technology at our fingertips that gives Blizzard an opportunity to let go of the simulated experience of raiding and turn it into, I guess, a strong story beat that we can enjoy the way that we want to. But what do you think, folks at home and elsewhere? Do you think Blizzard has already gone too far with AI and WoW? Or should they continue pursuing new ways to entertain us, like giving us these AI raids or dungeons? Let me know your thoughts on the comment below, but if you enjoyed yourself, please leave a like for the video and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.